أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحتك الإسام اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النكام اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء اللهم اغفر لكل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلحمني ذكرك اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني باسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت طاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وأزمى فيما عندك رغبته اللهم عزم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكروك وزهر أمرك وغلب كهلك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لكبائحي صافرا ولا لشيء من عملي الكبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي ظلمت نفسي ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجحني وسكنت إلى كريم ذكرك ومنك علي اللهم مولاي كم من كبيح سترت وكم من فاضح من الولاء أكلت وكم من إصار وكيت وكم من مكروه دفعت وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرتا اللهم أزم بلائي وأفرت بي سوء حالي وكسرت بي أعمالي، وكدأت بي أغلالي، وحبسني عن نفعي بعد آمالي، وخذتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها، ومثالي يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي، ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري، ولا تؤاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي، وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا، وعلي في جميع الأمور أتوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك، أسأله كشف ضري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي، ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي، فغرني بما أهوى وأسأله على ذلك انكذا، وتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعض حدودك، وخالفت بعض أوامرك، فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك، ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه كذاؤك، وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك، وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي، معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستكيلا مستغفرا منيبا مكرا مذعنا مؤترفا، لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني، ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري ودخالك إياي في سعة من رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري، وفكني من شد وصاكي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني، يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني، يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عزمي، يا من بدا خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتربيتي، هبني لابتداء كرمك وصالح برك بي، يا إلهي وسيدي وربي. أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك، وبعد ما انطوى إليه قلبي من معرفتك، ولحجابه لساني من ذكرك، وأعتقده زميري من حبك، وبعد تلك ترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك. هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيت، أو تبعد من أدنيت، أو تشرد من آويت، أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمت. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا، وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقا، وبشكرك مادحا، وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققا، وعلى ثمار رحبت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة، وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تأبدك طائعة، وأشارت باستغفارك مزئنا. وهكذا الظن بك، ولا أخبرنا بفضلك أنت يا كريم يا رب، يا كريم يا رب، يا كريم يا رب. وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها، وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكسور، يسير بقاء، كثير مدته. فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها، وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه، ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك. وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي. فكيف بي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين، يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي. لأي الأمور إليك أشكو، ولما من هذا الجوع أبكي، لأليم العذاب وشدته، أم لطول البلاء ومدته. فلئن سيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائي، وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائي، وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فحبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي. صبرت على عذابك، فكيف أصبر على فراقك؟ وحبني صبرت على حر نارك، فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك؟ أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي أفوق؟ فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا، لئن تركتني ناطقا لزجن إليك بين أهل هذا الديج الآمنين، ولا أصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين، ولا أبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين، ولا أنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين. أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم تجن فيها بمخالفتك، وذاك طعم عذابها بمعصيته، وخبث بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته، وهو يزج إليك زجيجا مؤمل رحمتك، ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك، وتوسلوا إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي. فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك؟ أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه؟ أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفا؟ أم كيف يتكلكل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقا، أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا رب؟ أم كيف يرجو فضلك في يده منها فتتركه فيها؟ هيهات، ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك. فباليقين أكتأ لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جهدي وكزيت به من إخلاص معاندي، لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما، وما كان لأحد فيها مكرا ولا مقاما، لكنك تقدست أسماؤك، أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها معاندين. وأنت جل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما، أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي، فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالكزية التي حكمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها، أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أذنبته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل عملته، كتمته أو أعلنته أخفيته أو أظهرته، وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيت وبفضلك سترت، وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلت أو إحسان فضلت أو بر نشرت أو رزق بسطت أو ذنب تغفر أو خطأ تستر. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك ركي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا أليما بزري ومسكنتي. أن تجعل أوقاتي في الليل والنهار بذكرك مأمورا وبخدمتك موصولا وأعمالي عندك مقبولا حتى تكون أعمالي وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا يا سيدي يا من عليهم أولي يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب قوي على خدمتك جوارحي واشدد على العزيمة جوارحي وهب لي الجد في خشيتك ودوام في اتصال بخدمتك حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في البارزين واشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين وخافك مخافة المؤمنين واجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرده ومن كادني فكده واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نسيبا عندك وأقربهم منزلة منك وأخسهم زلفة لديك فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك وجودي بجودك وعذف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وأكلني أسرتي واغفر زلتي فإنك كزيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وزمنت لهم الإجابة فإليك يا ربي نسبت وجهي وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي ولا تأتأ من فضلك رجائي واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي يا سريع الرضا يا سريع الرضا يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلافه البكاء يا سابغ النعم يا دافع النكم يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام يا عالما لا يعلم صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بما أنت أهله وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا اللهم صل
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. Jazakallah, Brother Daniel. May Allah accept your recitation and increase your tawfiqah. With that, now we'll switch over to Sheikh Aminustani. He's with us. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
If you're ready, we can get started.
إن شاء الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الخطبة الأولى. أول الدين معرفته، وكمال معرفته التصديق به، وكمال التصديق به توحيده، وكمال توحيده الإخلاص له، وكمال الإخلاص له نفي الصفات عنه لشهادة كل صفة أنها غير الموصوف، وشهادة كل موصوف أنه غير الصفة. Continuing with khutbah number 1 of Nahjul Balagha, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, after we put behind us the first part of the first section of this first khutbah, we move into the second part of the first section of this khutbah. The first section of this khutbah is where he's speaking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first section had to do with 12 characteristics of God that the Imam points out. And he moves on now to the second part of this section that's about God. And to be honest with all of you, he makes it into a class, okay? This part of the khutbah turns out to be, it sounds just like a class of theology, a class that discusses the tawheed of God subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so he begins with awwaluddin ma'rifatuhu, and you'll see how it's going to turn into kind of like a class, but let's see how this goes. Awwaluddin ma'rifatuhu, that deen begins with his ma'rifah, the knowledge and understanding of God. Now, what does deen here mean when he says awwaluddin ma'rifatuhu, that the beginning, the deen begins with the ma'rifah and cognition of God? What is meant by deen here is the entire package of deen, which is comprised of beliefs and do's and don'ts and so on. That's what deen equals. So this whole thing, this whole package that God has in store for us, that God wants us to embrace and follow and make part of our lives, it all begins with ma'rifatullah. That's what the Imam says here. Everything starts with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now some have said, no. Religion actually begins with not ma'rifatullah, but rather it begins with wujub at-tahqiq fillah. It begins with actually researching about God. First we research about Him, and then we once we understand that He's there and we discover Him and learn more about Him, then we have ma'rifah of Him. But if you think about it, brothers and sisters, even the fact that God's existence is questionable, yes, there's a chance that He exists, that is what pushes us to do research about God. The fitrah that Allah has put within us is what pushes us in the direction of learning about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in reality, it is true that the first action someone does maybe is reflection, is to study their surroundings, is to think and ponder over God's existence. That's true. That might be the first thing someone does. But the first element, that which is pushing a person to learn about God, to research about God, is God's existence itself, His questionable existence. The existence of God that we're not 100% sure about maybe. Yet, at the end of the day, that is what is pushing me towards trying to learn about Him. So in the end, ma'rifatullah is that first thing that deen starts with. Yes, it is because of that existence of God, or the possible existence of God, that we're going to go out and do what we need to do to figure out if He does exist or not actually. Yes? And so this statement that the Imam makes here is not at odds with what others might say, that the first thing we do though is research about God. Who says God is that first step? Yeah, God is the first step, meaning that God is the first element, main element that draws everything else in its direction, pushes everything else towards itself. right? Okay, so awwaluddin ma'rifatuhu, to know about God, to gain knowledge of God. Wa kamalu ma'rifatihi at-tasdiq bih. At-tasdiq, when you admit something, when you accept something, right? When you embrace something, when you verify something, when you say, yes, it does exist, this is called tasdiq in Arabic. We have this in Farsi as well. We might have it in Urdu too. Tasdiq means to say that something is sadiq, something is true, to accept that something is true. Here the Imam, he says, if you want to have real knowledge of God, you have to reach a point where not that you just know He's there, you have tasdiq of Him, which means that you have embraced Him in your heart. Some people give an example here. They'll say, uh, when you are next to a dead body, and that dead body is in your room at night for whatever reason, okay? Let's just say you have a dead body next to you. You will know that dead body, yes, is not dangerous, right? That's what being dead means, that body can't do anything anymore. We know that, but we are more afraid of it. It is only when I'm not really afraid of it that I have tasdiq that this body is actually dead. Okay? So here, when it says kamalu ma'rifatihi at-tasdiqu bih, it is one thing to have ma'rifah of Allah, to know what Allah is all about. If there is going to be a God, this is what He'll look like. He will have knowledge, He will have power, He'll have this, that, all of those attributes that are discussed in theology regarding God. Yes? This is what a God looks like. But have you embraced that God with all those attributes or not? Has that God permeated your heart or not? Well, not yet. Okay, then. At-tasdiq. There were people during the Prophet's time. They know that God is the truth, right? They knew that the message of the Holy Prophet was true. Yet they turned away from it. Can we say now that these people, they have their religion, they have deen just because they know it's true? Knowing is one thing, accepting is another thing. No, the Quran says these two can be separate from each other. The fact that you know something and the fact that you actually embrace it and accept it. Yes? وَجَحَدُوا بِهَا وَاسْتَيْقَنَتْهَا أَنفُسُهُمْ. That there were people out there who went against the message of God and the message of the Prophet and the Prophets. جَحَدُوا بِهَا but وَاسْتَيْقَنَتْهَا أَنفُسُهُمْ. But they had yaqeen that this message is a true message. So these two can be separate from each other. Here Imam Ali, he says, Kamalu ma'rifatihi, if the highest level of ma'rifah of Allah is to reach a point where you say, okay, now this God that's supposed to have these attributes actually exists. I accept that He exists. Either this or, well, there might be other explanations to this line, but this one seems to be the most befitting of this context that we're in. Let's move on now. وَكَمَالُ التَّصْدِيقِ بِهِ تَوْحِيدُهُ. That the highest level of tasdiq of Him, of accepting Him, yes, is what? Tawheeduhu. Tawheed in Arabic is the infinitive of wahada. Wahada means to make something one, right? Or to know something as one. Tawheed is the infinitive of this. Yes, knowing something as one, or making it one thing only, not more than one. Now here when it says kamalu tasdiq bih, if you want to know if you really got it right when it comes to accepting Him the way He really is, then yet that only happens through His tawheed, meaning tawheeding Him. Meaning what? Meaning making Him one. He is one of a kind, one and only, unique. Yes, unmatchable. I might have one phone, but that phone is matchable. There might be other replicas of it. But this Tawheed means that no, He is one and only, impossible to be replicated and duplicated. Yes. So a good sign that a person has actually reached that point of the proper acceptance of God's existence is that they have Tawheed of Him. All right. وَكَمَالُ تَوْحِيدِهِ الْإِخْلَاصُ لَهُ. And the highest level of God's Tawheed, to make Him one and to know Him as one, is to do what? Al-Ikhlasu lahu. There are three explanations and interpretations to this line. Al-Ikhlasu lahu. Some have said this ikhlas here is a practical ikhlas. Some will say no, it's an ikhlas in the heart, and some will say no, it's a theological ikhlas. Let me explain these three, and then we'll talk about which one of these is probably meant by the Holy Imam alayhi salam. Al-ikhlas sometimes is the practical ikhlas that we're all familiar with, right? Before I get into these three different opinions, let's talk about what the meaning of ikhlas is literally. Yes, in lexicon, ikhlas means to purify, to make something khalis, to refine it. Now, for example, they'll say he's a mukhlis, that means he's a person that does things with ikhlas. Well, what is he purifying? He's purifying his intention. Yes, we have the mukhlasin in the Quran. Who are they? The ones who were purified by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? So now if that's the literal meaning, is to get rid of all the extra, all the additives, that are stuck to something and make it pure. Here, ikhlas can mean one of these three, they say. Some have said it means al-ikhlasu lahu means to only worship Him, purify our intentions for Him. If we do anything, it's for Him and His love and getting close to Him, and so on. That famous conventional definition or meaning or usage of al-ikhlas, right? That's one meaning, one tafsir of this line or of this part of this khutbah. Someone said, no, al-ikhlasu lahu means to have ikhlas in the heart. What does that mean? To purify your heart of everything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That means that if someone were to open up your heart, all they see in you is Allah, Allah, Allah. Yes? This is a higher level than just practical ikhlas. Sometimes I have a lot of different things that I'm attached to, a lot of things that I am fond of and take pleasure in. But at the end of the day, when I do something that I have to have qastul qurba in, that I have to have a pure intention in, I will purify my intention in it. So for example, it is time to do salah. There are people around and in the masjid, and I know if I'm going to start praying, they'll see me. But I'm going to go pray anyway. It's that prime time of salat, and I don't want to miss out on it. So I go stand there and I start praying, but I make sure that I'm doing this only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I might have a million other attachments in life. If you open up my heart, you'll find a lot of things other than Allah in it. But because of fear of akhirah, because of fear of punishment, whatever it is, I make sure I don't mess up when it comes to my salat and the intention that I'm supposed to have. So I purify my intention, right? This person, their heart can have a lot of things in it, but their intentions will be pure when it is a condition for one's intention and for one's worship being accepted. But the second interpretation, which said if you open their heart, there's nothing in it except Allah, is a higher level than that first one. In that first one, this person has to struggle and purify their intention. Make sure that their intention is pure, because there are other things in that person's heart too. People are watching. Okay, so people are in my heart too. Yeah? Next to Allah, there's also people and what they think. So I have to make an active effort when I start my prayer to do it only for Allah. But think about it, brothers and sisters. If there's someone out there who has a pure heart to begin with, meaning there's no one other than Allah yes, in their heart. They won't even have to struggle with purifying their intention. The only time you have to purify your intention is when you have more than Allah in your heart. But this person has only Allah in their heart, so they don't have to worry. Their intentions will always be pure, will always hit the bullseye. So this is another interpretation of this. Kamalu tawheedihi al-ikhlasu lah. If you want to make sure that you have really tawheeded him the right way, the way he deserves, then it is to have ikhlas for him, either through your actions or even in your heart, and just throw out everything else other than him from your heart. These are two interpretations of this part of the khutbah. And I'm going to be honest with all of you that whenever I would read this khutbah, this part of it, I was a little confused, because usually ikhlas means one of these two that I just mentioned. But it wouldn't click for me. It just didn't feel right. And I'll explain after I go through the third interpretation and tafsir of this part of the khutbah. Some say no, al-ikhlasu lah, to make sure that you have tawheed the way it's supposed to be. Yes, that highest level of tawheed, it is to have theological ikhlas of God. What does that mean? Theological? Those first two were akhlaqi mostly. One was fiqhi even. One was more akhlaqi, irfani, and then one is theological. What does that mean? Well, ikhlas in this third interpretation is closer to that lexical meaning of the term, to get rid of any impurity. Okay? Getting rid of all impurities of God. Now, God, of course, does not have any impurity. We believe God is immaculate and so on and so forth. It's nonsense to say that God needs to be purified, or that God suffers from impurities that we have to help him get rid of. No. So what is meant here, al-ikhlasu lah, means that understanding, that picture, that image, that concept of God that you have in your mind, that reflects the real God outside, is a reflection of him and represents him in your mind. Remove all impurities from that image of God, metaphorically speaking, of course, of that concept of God in your mind. Get rid of all the impurities. Now here, which one of these three is meant? When we look at the context of this khutbah, and this part especially of this khutbah, it's clear the Imam is speaking about theology. The Imam is speaking about beliefs regarding God. Yeah, he started with ma'rifah. Ma'rifah is conceptual knowledge. Yes, so that has to do with what's happening in the mind and understanding of God. And then after ma'rifatihi, tawheeduhu, to know him as one, or to make him one in your mind. So once again, it has to do with your mind. Kamalu tawheedihi al-ikhlasu lah. And then when we look after this, we also see the list continues. They're all theological belief or Islamic belief related matters that the Imam is speaking about. So this al-ikhlasu lah that is in the middle of all of this has got to do something with something that is in the mind, is theological, is theoretical again. Right? What does it mean if you want to know God, or if you want to have tawheed of God, then you have to make your intentions pure. Yes? There is not, I cannot find what's the correspondence between these two? These two don't correspond with each other. One has to do with my actions. Another has to do with theory and theology. Yes? Tawheed is a theological matter. And then all of a sudden we jump to, hey, make sure you don't pray for other than God, or make sure no one else other than God is in your heart. Yeah, this is what has pushed mufassirin of Nahjul Balagha to say that no, al-ikhlas here means to remove all impurities from God and the understanding of God that you have. Yeah, but I will say this: some commentators have taken the first or the second meaning. And maybe it's slipped their mind that There is another option. You don't have to take one of those two options, those first two options. There is a third option as well. That is a theological ikhlas, so to speak. Okay. So that's what personally I'm inclined to as well. It makes sense. It clicks. It flows with the rest of the khutbah. Especially with what follows. وَكَمَالُ الْإِخْلَاصِ نَفْيُ الصِّفَاتِ عَنْهُ. Do you want to know if you've really removed all impurities from God and not attributed any impurities to Him? Yes. The only way that ikhlas, the real way it's supposed to be, in its perfect form, kamalul ikhlas, can take place is through what? Is through nafyu sifati anhu. Yes. Is to repel from Him all sifat, all adjectives, all attributes, all descriptions. We're going to talk about this a little bit. Now, if anyone's listening who is familiar with Arabic, I forgot to say one thing, that based on that third tafsir of al-ikhlas lah, based on that third interpretation, that lam will not be a lam of milkiyah or anything like that. It'll be a lam called lam at-taqwiyah. Now, this was not in any of these tafsirs. This is just me speaking here. We have a lam in Arabic. It's lam at-taqwiyah, which it's not an amil, but it comes on the maf'ul of an infinitive and of a masdar and strengthens the amal of the masdar in its maf'ul. Okay? All right, now going back to what we're talking about. If you want to have proper ikhlas of Allah, meaning remove all impurities from Him, the Imam, he says, nafyu sifati anhu, is to negate all attributes from Him. Don't attribute anything to Him. And so here, we are standing, scratching our heads. What's going on? What do you mean we're not supposed to attribute anything to God? Can we not say God is great? Can we not say God is one? Can we not say all these things that we've learned from Islam, from the Quran itself, how God is? So how are we going to not attribute anything to Him all of a sudden? Is God like this unknown entity that we have no clue about? Is that how it works? The Imam sounds like he's maybe one of the, God forbid, one of the mu'attilah, the ones who say, don't even speak about God and describe anything of Him. Is that what it is? Let's talk about this a little bit. It said you want to remove all impurities from Him. And for that, don't attribute anything to Him. Well, what do you attribute? You attribute sifat. Yes, you ascribe attributes to God. Attributes are two types, brothers and sisters. Some attributes are the attributes of the makhluqat, the mumkinul wujud, God's creation. Yes, there's a ball, it's big. There's another ball that's bigger. There's another ball that's smaller. Okay, these are all creation of God. There's a tree that's bigger. There's a mountain that's bigger. There's an ocean that's bigger. There's a planet that's bigger. There's a galaxy that's bigger, and so on and so forth. All of these things, all of these attributes, they are the attributes of the makhluqat. Someone is knowledgeable. Okay? Someone is knowledgeable. Okay. They have knowledge. This is an attribute of one of the makhluqat. What does that mean? That means that they have attributes, but those attributes are not one with their essence. They are something that was additional to the essence of that thing. All right? Now, this is the part where I'm saying it becomes like a class. Imam Ali, here in Nahjul Balagha, this first khutbah, and I said this in our last session as well, he gets a little sophisticated, he gets a little complicated. Well, he doesn't sound too complicated because he keeps it very simple, which is also mind-blowing, but when you want to actually open it up and explain it, it takes some explanation. It gets a little difficult to understand maybe. So I want us to pay attention now. When I say big mountain, I have ascribed bigness to this mountain. Question, is bigness part of the essence of the mountain? In other words, if I'm going to define mountain, does it have to necessarily be big? Can we not have a small mountain? Yeah, we can have a small mountain. Bigness and smallness, size, are not part of the essence of a mountain. Yeah? There's an individual who's knowledgeable. All right? So and so is knowledgeable. Well, is knowledge one with that person's essence such that it's part of that person's essence and when we want to define what that person is? No. The definition of a human being has nowhere in it knowledge. And a good proof for that is when we're born as human beings, we have no knowledge, yes? Or there are certain pieces of knowledge that we don't have that we learn later, of course. That shows that knowledge was not part of our essence. It was added to us later, right? Okay. So there are attributes, yeah, that belong to us or belong to creation, but belong to it not as a part of its essence. They were additional to their essence, okay? They can be devoid of that attribute and they'll still be that thing. A human being who loses his or her memory is still a human being. Yes, a mountain that was big, a volcano that was huge, but then after a while erodes and becomes smaller and smaller, still it's a mountain. Yeah, unless it totally is wiped out, it's not even a mountain anymore to begin with, for us to discuss if it's small or big. All right, so there are those attributes that belong to all of creation, and they are in the billions, in the trillions, maybe. But then there are those attributes that belong to God. They are the sifat of the wajib al-wujud. And these sifat are the very essence of God himself. If someone was to ask you, what is God? You say, God is all existence. What is God? God is all knowledge. What is God? God is all power. In other words, you can't take away power from God. It goes against him being God. You can take knowledge from human being because it doesn't go against that his or her being a human being. But at the moment you take power, the moment you take knowledge from God, he's not God anymore. It's part of the essence of God, part of the definition of God. As a matter of fact, the entire essence of God is knowledge. The entire essence of God is power. Now, this is very theological / philosophical. I'm not going to go any deeper than this. So we have two types of attributes, brothers and sisters. Okay? We are trying to understand what Imam Ali means when he says removing all impurity from God equals not attributing any attributes to him. Okay. We said there are two types of attributes. The attributes of the creation, attributes of God himself. Now let's go 1400 years back when Imam Ali is actually delivering this khutbah and sermon to the people that are listening to him. Are the people that are listening to him Avicenna, Abu Ali Sina? Are the people listening to him Aristotle and Plato and these people? No, they're not. They're the normal people. And so the Imam is speaking to them using terms that they are familiar with. They're not familiar with this idea of sifat of wajibul wujud, attributes of God that are one with his essence that cannot be removed from his essence and negated from it. No, they're not familiar with that. What they are familiar with is big, small, hot, cold, black, white, these kinds of things. That's what they're familiar with. And so they are, in other words, they are familiar with sifatul mumkinat. They're more familiar with sifatul makhluqat, these sifat, these attributes, the attributes of the creatures of God and creation of God. Yeah? And so here, although Imam Ali says, nafyu sifati an, the highest level and the right way of removing all impurity from God is to not ascribe attributes to him. And he says the word attributes in an unrestricted way. But what he means is, now, and God is all knowing, all knows best, but What it seems that he means here is that all of these sifat that we have in our everyday lives that we use for other things, ascribing those to Allah is a problem and brings impurity to him. And of course, once again, I have to repeat this, not impurity to him in his essence, but the idea of him and the notion of him that we have in our mind, it gets tainted with impurities. When we use the same attributes to describe him that we use for normal things out there, for his creation. Yes, even the big, the small, the hearing and the seeing, the knowing, the having power, all of these, we have an understanding of these attributes that is tainted with restriction, that is limited, yes, and brings limits to them. So for example, when I say God is one, yes, Allah is one, but do you understand what Allah being one is? You as in anybody. Do we understand what being one is? Sometimes being one means that, yes, I have one phone. Okay, you have one phone, but this oneness that you have for your phone, when you say God is one, do you mean the same thing? I have one phone, I have, one book, I have one God. What does that mean? Well, that means I don't have two gods. It's only one. Well, here, your idea of oneness, my idea of oneness is problematic. Why? Because it carries with it and comes with it an impurity. The fact that it can be replicated, it can be duplicated, it can be two, that itself is a weakness. That itself is an impurity and restriction. That's limiting God. My God is one, but there's a possibility it can be two, but it's one. No, oneness here is something much higher than the oneness that we use in our everyday lives for other things. Right? So here, oneness means something else. But what does Imam Ali mean here when he says, don't ascribe oneness to him? He means don't ascribe that oneness, that your everyday oneness, your everyday greatness, your everyday knowledge. Oh my God, this alim, he's so knowledgeable. This scholar, he's so knowledgeable. Oh my God, this imam, this holy prophet, yes, is so knowledgeable. Knowledgeable here is one thing. Knowledgeable somewhere else when it comes to God and the realm of God is something else, brothers and sisters. I see. You see. And Allah also sees. Excuse me. I see with my eyes. Yes? And I only see a certain area. Is that how God, it works for God? But yeah, no, it's not. It's different. But I use the same sifa. I use the same attribute. Yes, you did. And that's the problem. Yes, because we are familiar with these everyday attributes. And then we use them for God. These attributes carry negative baggage with them. And it will rub off on Allah. And so when we use attributes to describe Allah, yes, what happens is we are actually giving him and tainting him with impurity as well. Tainting him, once again, meaning in our minds, or else he is all pure and all immaculate. Yeah. So here with the Imam, he says, Kamalul Ikhlasi lahu. If you want to know if you've properly removed all impurity, all restriction, all limitation from him, then see if you are not attributing sifat to him. If you are not attributing sifat to him, then you're good. But if you're attributing sifat to him, there are attributes that you're ascribing to him, then you don't have the unlimited version of that attribute understood in your mind. And so you haven't understood God being one properly. You haven't understood God being all knowledgeable. But yes, it's better than nothing. But at the end of the day, brothers and sisters, we have to know and understand that we will say God is hearing, all knowing and all that, but we have not understood what those terms exactly mean. As a result, we haven't reached that highest level of Tawheed of Allah. because the highest level of Tawheed of Allah is to understand Him without the impurities. And I'm going to say it, all of us, our understanding of God is with limitation and is going to be impure. Now, does God expect us to know Him the way He's supposed to be known? We talked about that in our first session for this khutbah. And no, it's not even possible maybe. But we can try our best to get as much as we can. Kamal al-Ikhlas, Nafyu al-Sifati anhu. All right. That's why usually, when the Quran, gives these attributes to God, it'll sometimes follow up with something else. Or in other verses, it'll let us know that, look, there's nothing like God. So if we say God is like this, God is like that, it's not like the way you guys know it. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. Or Subhanallah amma yasifun. That Allah is much greater and higher than the good things people say about Him, even. Yes, there are only one group that know what they're talking about, إِلَّا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ الْمُخْلَصِينَ. Those purified, chosen servants of Allah, they're the ones who know what they're talking about when they speak of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, but everyone else out there, they think that they've got it down 100%. That's not the case. No, they're not even close to understanding what God is and these attributes of God really are supposed to reflect. Yeah. All right. And that's why in another part of this same khutbah, the Imam, when he's speaking about the angels, inshallah we'll get to that section, says, لا يتوهمون ربهم بالتصوير ولا يجرون عليه صفات المصنوعين. They don't understand God and picture God, the angels. They don't picture God just with the sifat and attributes of those things that are created. So they have a better understanding of what God is all about. It's pretty cool. May Allah, give us that tawfiq to get closer and closer to that. That's something to aim for. For now, that which we can do is follow Allah's commands, inshallah, very precisely, so that Allah gives us such cognition. Okay. Why should we not attribute these attributes to God? Yes, the impurities that they come with, that's one. There's another problem as well. And that is when the same way I say a knowledgeable person, I say all-powerful God, when I do that, what happens is that concept that I brought next to God, that I brought next to human being, like knowledge, this is practically saying, this attribute that I've added is practically telling me that I am one thing and He is something else. Okay, let me explain with that example again of the knowledgeable person. When I say human being, okay, that means human being. When I say knowledgeable human being, what does that mean? That means we have human being, that's one thing, and we have knowledge, which is something totally different. And these two have come together now, and there's a relationship and link between them. Yes? Whenever I use these sifatul makhluqeen, whenever I use these attributes of creation for creation, what is it saying practically? That attribute is saying that I am something else other than it. And that's why you are connecting me to it. You're saying, Ali is an alim. Ali has ilm. You bring them together in this sentence. But this is one thing, that's another thing. Yeah? This is a problem, the Imam is saying. When you use the sifat, when you use the attributes of makhluqeen for God, the attribute says, I am one thing, God is another thing. Now let's stick them together. That's what's happening. The sifa and the mawsuf both are saying each of us is separate from each other. We are two different things. Yes? And if we're two different things, we're not one anymore. And that is a big, big problem. Yes. And that's why the Imam continues here. Yes, he says, okay, so he says, لِشَهَادَةِ كُلِّ صِفَةٍ أَنَّهَا غَيْرُ الْمَوْصُوفِ, because every attribute testifies that it is other than that which it is being attributed to. وَالشَّهَادَةِ كُلِّ مَوْصُوفٍ أَنَّهُ غَيْرُ الصِّفَةِ, and the thing we attribute a sifah to, that thing is testifying that I am one thing other than the attribute you are linking to me. We are two separate things. Well, what's the problem with that? It's very clear what the problem with that is. فَمَنْ وَصَفَ اللَّهِ فَقَدْ قَرَنَهُ. So as a result, whoever describes God, ascribes attributes to him, qaranahu, has actually paired him with something else. Because once again, as I said, the way we see things, yes, or the people of 1400 years ago who were not familiar with philosophy, maybe the way they saw things was that there's a God and then we're going to stick knowledge to him. So you are pairing God with something else here. And whoever وَمَنْ قَرَنَهُ فَقَدْ ثَنَّاهُ, whoever pairs God with something else, God with knowledge now. These are two things in one, and we call the package God now. فَقَدْ ثَنَّاهُ, he's actually made him two, dualized him. He's not one anymore. There's two things here. وَمَنْ ثَنَّاهُ فَقَدْ جَزَّأَهُ, and whosoever dualizes God has given him juz, has given him parts. So in reality, God is a package made up of himself and knowledge. Two things actually. Two parts that come together to make a whole. وَمَنْ جَزَّأَهُ فَقَدْ جَهِلَهُ, and whoever breaks God down into parts and sees him being comprised of parts, فَقَدْ جَهِلَهُ, this person does not have knowledge and ma'rifah of Allah, but rather has ignorance of Allah, does not know what Allah is all about. Why? Let's go back to the beginning of the khutbah. أول الدين معرفته وكمال معرفته توحيده. The highest level of his ma'rifah and understanding what he's all about is to make him one. So if you've made him two and made him have parts and he's not one anymore, if him being one equaled ma'rifah, that means him not being one equals lack of ma'rifah. Lack of ma'rifah equals jahl. And when you have jahl of Allah and you don't know what Allah is all about, then it's a slippery slope after that. Lots of other bad things come along as well, and that is something that the Imam is going to point out in the continuation of this khutbah that inshallah we will cover in our next session. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.